Hello, my name is Brianna Tittle. I currently volunteer at Learning Care Group at a local child time facility that I previously worked for. Today we'll be reviewing my findings in 7 different categories, which include gender, race, disability, family structure, language, and religion. I'll also share my findings that reflect the windows and mirrors in which my students are able to view the world around them and the world through others, through literature, and what I can add to my library to supplement their learning or curiosity, which is very important to me. But yeah, let's get started. So I currently have 13 students in my classroom, 8 of which are male, 5 are female. When I added the first 50 books in my classroom, I was able to find that 56% of those books had main male characters, 30% had female characters, and non-human, non-binary, and other made up the rest of that. Although my classroom is predominantly male, I think the amount of representation that I have in the classroom is very consistent and valid for the genders I do have. But I did find it interesting that there are a higher percentage of main male characters in the books than female characters. I definitely want the girls in my classroom to feel like they are represented and have a voice. So that's where I'm trying to fix my library in that perspective. But many of the books I audited definitely represented the gender in my classroom in a meaningful way in which I wanted to. Next is race. Currently, the race in my classroom consists of mostly Hispanic students. I have mostly bilingual students in my classroom. African American students consists of 3 students, and 1 is white. The books I randomly selected appear to be a white demographic, which I found in my audit. 10% of that contain stories of African American students, and 4% of that contained of Hispanic characters. With this data, I could see that I need more books that represent the Hispanic demographic in my classroom, which makes sense. I have mostly bilingual students. I need to put out more books that have English and Spanish in them, so they do get that language in them and know that they are being represented and reflective in my classroom library. Next, I want to talk about family structure. Most of my students don't have a typical family dynamic. They do not have mother, father, and themselves. More than half of my students are growing up in single parent households, typically a mother. But yeah, I don't have many books that represent a mother, father, brother situation, or just brothers. And I would like to incorporate that more in my classroom library. I feel like it's very important for my students to feel like they are being represented through those books. But it's also a great window for them to see that there are more family structures in this world, and know that the family they are put in is not something that they're stuck with, which I have found out personally. Nobody's typically stuck with the family that they're in. They mostly find their family, which is very important, and it's often seen through literature. You have brother and brother, sister, and sister that are just working through it, which is a great way to represent that through family structure books. Next topic I want to talk about is economic diversity. Most of my students, I do work for a Title I school, or I volunteer for a Title I center, and most of them do struggle with economic diversity, and I do not have enough books in my classroom that represent them, which I am working on that, and that will be seen throughout my classroom. The next topic I want to talk about is disability, and I do not have enough disability books, which is a great way to show children that there are different people in this world. There are people that can't communicate, that can't express themselves in the same way that everyone else express themselves, which I guess kids are in the same boat. Like, kids can't communicate, kids can't have that language, and inclusion is such a big part in early education. I feel like it's not talked about enough, and it should be. Disability is a great way, children with disability is a great way to provide inclusion into early education classrooms and provide that experience for children and get them to acknowledge those people and acknowledge that they are just like them. They just need accommodations and respect, just like every other individual needs. And I want to find a way that I can get more disability books into my classroom and have that represented in a way, even though I do not hold any children in my classroom right now that have disabilities, but I do want to represent them in some way. Next topic, language and religion. Like I previously talked about, I do have a lot of children that are bilingual. I work every day with them. I myself am not a Spanish speaking person, so what I do is I use visuals and I use communication tools to talk to them. I don't ever force English on them. I use other means of communication, and I feel like literature in that sense is a great means of communication, and it's important to me especially to have books that show Spanish and show English in that perspective. But yeah, so like I was talking about, the part of my classroom that I did audit is it is a good window for my students because I do share books that have a lot of characters that are imagined. I have a lot of characters that are non-human, they're animals, and I feel like that's a good representation for them. They can see through a window from that. The characters are doing and saying things beyond the imagination of what kids in my classrooms are doing now. Most of the books I audited have characters that are non-human and share a perspective in which the readers do not typically live, such as being on a farm, which the students in my classroom don't typically live on a farm, or have a snowy day. We live in Arizona, like there's not going to be a snowy day ever. But the categories I would say have a strong window is the gender in my classroom, which is predominantly male. Gender in my classroom. Race, I do have a lot of African American, and I want to incorporate a lot of Latinx books in my classroom because a lot of my kids are Hispanic. And then I want to get more family structures in my library, which would be a great window for that, like the kids that don't experience that, but would also be a good mirror for the kids that do experience that. The books I did audit for them, obviously, good mirror for them because they can see themselves in that perspective. They can see themselves. I want to say one of the books I have is Hola Amiga Abuela, and it's a great book to see grandma and granddaughter have that dynamic. And I feel like most of the kids in my classroom do have that dynamic with their grandma or abuela. But yeah, that's how I do windows and mirrors in my classroom, and I hope in the future I do teach my children, like, this is a window to you, this is a mirror to you. Do you see that? Do you reflect on that? Do you see the person next to you? He's different from you. How can you tell, or how can you say that you're a mirror of that, or how you're a window of that? And yeah, that's what I want to teach my students or children in the classroom about where they're at in their life. Additions to my classroom. There are 3 books I found I would like to add to my library. One of which is What Happened to You. It's a great book that explores disabilities, which none of my children do have disabilities, but they will encounter them later in life, which is very important. And I don't ever want them to judge people for being different. So it's a great opportunity for me in an early childhood classroom to let them explore that and introduce them to different people that may not have what they represent in the community, but people with disabilities have the same effect as they do. The second one is Rey Dead, or El Días de los Muertos. This is a great book. I have a lot of Hispanic speaking students, Hispanic cultures. They'd love this book. They'd engage in it. They'd be like, I hope they'd come to me and say, oh, we learned this in my family, and so forth and so on. Another one, because I do have 3 other African American students that I feel like are less represented because we are a bilingual classroom and we do often speak English and Spanish, but they have to be represented also. So I want to incorporate When God Made You, which is the main character is a female, she's African American, and I'd love to incorporate that in my library. But yeah, that's it, and thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for sharing with me. I hope you guys enjoyed this course, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you guys so much.